Today, we are going to be creating a VPN on-demand connection to an AWS Transit virtual interface. So before we do that configuration, the first thing we're going to do is walk through what the logical connectivity looks like. So on our left-hand side here, we have a customer building or premise that has a customer router in it that is connected to the Lumen MPLS-based VPN. And that is connected in just one location here for simplicity's sake, but this VPN could encapsulate hundreds of sites. So there could be many sites here. And then as we move from left to right, the next thing we're going to do is show that we're going to connect into AWS. Now, there's a few components to that we want to talk about. The first is that in the Lumen network, for this customer, we have what's called a virtual routing and forwarding table on their MPLS VPN. The customer could have one or many of these, but it's important to understand what that is. The next thing are these PEs. Those are provider edge routers. And so this is the PE or provider edge router the customer connects to. And the customer wants to get to, say, in our example is going to be AWS West 1. Well, to do that, we are going to connect on their behalf to AWS, we being Lumen. And we're going to do that through this connection we create. And the customer can create this connection themselves. But what's happening, and it's important to note, is that this VRF, our virtual routing and forwarding table, is actually peering directly with AWS. So it's important to understand that there's no peering taking place or no connectivity per se taking place between the customer's site and AWS, like a normal layer 2 or layer 1 connection. The connectivity is taking place between the customer network that exists within the MPLS cloud and AWS. So let's get started. We're going to jump out of this diagram that I have, and we're going to move into our AWS console. And the first thing we're going to do is create a direct connect gateway. Now, you can see these have been recently visited by me. However, if you didn't know how to get to those, you would go to all services, and these are all the various services in AWS you can configure. You're going to actually drop down here to networking and content delivery, and you are going to select direct connect. After you select direct connect, the next thing that you're going to do is create a direct connect gateway. So I'm going to select direct connect gateways under direct connect, and then I'm going to go ahead and create that direct connect gateway. I'm going to put a name in here, and the name that I create is really just for the purposes of being able to recognize it later when I'm configuring other parts of this. I'm going to call this Direct Connect Gateway 9. And they're going to ask here about, the AWS console is going to ask for an Amazon side autonomous system number. Now, the default that everyone uses is 64,512. However, you could pick a different autonomous system number if you wanted to assign to AWS. I'm going to stick with the default to keep things simple, but if you were to change this number, keep in mind what that change was. If it's 65,512 or something else, just remember what that number was because you'll need it later in the configuration. So for now, I'm going to put 64512. And I'm going to click here where it says Create Direct Connect Gateway in my AWS console. I'm going to go ahead and click that. That is going to create that gateway. Now, what I need to do, I've got my Direct Connect Gateway being created. I'm going to go over to Control Center. So this is Lumen's portal, and within the Lumen Control Center portal, I'm going to hover over Services, and I'm going to jump up to the Add Services flyout. And then here are all the things that I could add. we are doing a demonstration on VPN on demand, so I'm going to stick with that subject, but there are many other topics here that will be introduced in other videos. So I'm going to click Add because I want to add this on-demand connection from my site as a customer to AWS. So the first thing that I need to do this is we need to select our customer ID, and this customer ID would be assigned to you by Lumen. So this is a test bed environment. So I just have that user acceptance testing customer ID I'm using here. And then under billing account number, you could organize all of the different parts of your organization under different billing account numbers. That way you could bill out to those different organizations as you see fit. I'm going to select my billing account number, and then I'm going to get a list of VRFs. Again, a VRF is a virtual routing and forwarding table. And what it represents is all of the connectivity between your sites on an MPLS VPN. So while that's pulling up our VRF list, if we jump back here to this diagram, this just happens to be one VRF, but I technically could have many VRFs as a customer. So it's important to know which one. And it's also important to know which band or billing account number is associated with that VRF. So I'm going to come back to Control Center. And now I have my VRFs populated, or my virtual routing and forwarding tables populated. If I didn't know which one was the one I wanted to use, and I needed some help, I could click on this View Details, and it would pull all of the IP routes that exist in that MPLS VPN. So that might help you deduce what you want to connect to. In most cases, most customers are only going to have one VRF or a few VRFs, or virtual routing forwarding tables. So I'm going to pick my VRF. I'm going to come down here and select the cloud service provider I want to connect to. You'll notice we have AWS, Azure, Google, and Oracle. I'm going to select AWS, and then I'm going to go back to the AWS console, and up under my user ID here, I'm going to copy my account ID. Now, the reason I need that account ID is that's really like my credentials to get onto AWS. So I'm going to paste that in. And then I'm going to my cloud on-ramp provider list here, and I'm going to select something in US West 1. So here we go. Los Angeles, there's 100 gig NNI in Los Angeles. I'm going to select that 100 gig NNI. I also am going to need to put a service nickname in. So in this case, I'm going to call this test direct, direct connect. Home keys are off for me. Direct Connect 9. All right, so I've got this service that I'll recognize the nickname by. I have my VRF selected further up here. I have my cloud provider selected, AWS, I have my account ID in the on-ramp. I'm going to click Continue. You have two options. You could be billed monthly or you could be billed hourly. If I am a customer that is building infrastructure as code, I'm probably going to want to use hourly because I'm tearing things down and I'm rebuilding them and moving things around a lot. If I am not that type of user and I'm a set it and forget it user, meaning I know my workload exists in AWS, I need to get to it every month and I need to get to it with 50 megs of bandwidth, I'm just going to select that bandwidth that I need. So in either case, you be billed either hourly or you be billed monthly based on the level of bandwidth connectivity you want to that cloud service provider. I'm going to pick 50 megs and move forward. Now, in this additional settings tab, we have several other things that we have influence over. If we go back to our diagram here, you'll recall that I said we're not peering with AWS directly from our site. We're actually peering from the Lumen MPLS network into AWS. So if I go back to Control Center here, I have all these options, and these options are how I control what's advertised from this MPLS VRF or virtual routing and forwarding table that has all of my connectivity, however many sites are connected. I'm controlling how I advertise that into AWS and how AWS sees that. So if we go back here, you'll recall that I did mention this autonomous system number for AWS. The default is always 64,512. However, if you would change that to say 65,500, this is where you would change that. And this tab is all about routing, just to be clear. Secondarily, there's primary and backup here. What does that mean? Well, what that is a way that if, let's say, if I go back to my drawing, I've got the Lumen MPLS network, I've got customer site number 1. Let's say I had customer site number 2 down here, and say this was in the West Coast, this was in the East Coast. I might want to create 2 of these connections. One connection to the West Coast, one connection to the East Coast. So in this primary backup selection, this connection I'm creating, I'm telling the Lumen MPLS network that I want that to be the prioritized connection or the non-prioritized connection, meaning the backup. Next, we're going to talk about routing. And there are 3 routing sort of functions that we allow you to use. One of 3 is your selection. So the first option is you can advertise what most people know is the RFC 1918 space or the private IP address space. And so RFC is request for comment, part of the IETF or Internet Engineering Task Force standards. Basically, it's saying we will announce 10, 172.16, and 192.168 out of your MPLS network towards AWS. That's the easy button for AWS in my personal opinion. However, there are other options. One option is to advertise all of your prefixes from your MPLS network other than specific prefixes that you've tagged with a BGP community string. So when I say prefix, I'm just talking about an IP route like we see here. Finally, the other option is deny all routes except those specified. So I could type in here 10.0.0.8. And I could say that's the only thing I want to advertise to AWS because that's in my entire network. You could do that if you wanted. Or you could do this and you could say, oh, there are a few other sites that have a few routes I want to also advertise. Those sites, you would use the BGP community string 67458610 attached to that route as you have announced it. I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to abandon this. I'm going to go back here and use the easy button for AWS. And then finally, your last option, do you want to advertise a default route into the CSP from your MPLS cloud? Most customers say no, but you do have the option to say yes. I'm going to stick with no and hit continue. Okay, so we're ready to move forward. We have basically all of the specifics of what we were doing. We have our customer ID, we have the billing account number, it's going to get billed for it within that ID. We have a service nickname that we can go back and find if we need to. We also have which cloud provider we're going to, which on-ramp, what our virtual routing and forwarding table identifier is, what its description was, and what our billing method was, and finally what our pricing is. So if that all looks good, we will go over here and we'll submit our order. All right, so now our order is in order provisioning status. And so it is going to start filling in information as it gets across the design, configure, activate, and completion statuses. So keep in mind this portion, what we've just done is we've just created this MPLS connection, sorry. We've just created this VPN on demand connection between our VRF, or our virtual routing and forwarding table, and the nearest PE, or provider edge router, to the nearest direct connect router in that on-ramp that we selected. So this line, this orange line, if you will, that's what we're building now. When that gets created, we're going to go back into the AWS console. We're going to go ahead and create the VIF that actually, or the virtual interface that allows us to get to our virtual private clouds. So we'll come back to Control Center and we'll see that it's filled in the design, it's filled in the configuration. Next step will be activate. So one thing to note is this is moving forward, is that down here under connector attributes, there's some very important information. I've talked several times about how we're not peering between the customer prem and AWS. We're peering between the Lumen network and AWS. And so within Control Center, the Lumen ASN represents your on-site ASN as far as AWS is concerned. And the cloud ASN, which we talked about before, her autonomous system number is 64512. And then finally, we have a few other things that will start to fill in. One of those is this BGP authentication key. This is what's going to keep our BGP session private and secure. And then we have the Lumen router IP and the cloud provider router IP. Now, these IP addresses are important to us along with that BGP authentication key, along with these autonomous system numbers we just talked about, because we're going to need those when we build our transit VIF. So we'll wait for a little while here and we'll see some other things filled in and then we can go build our transit virtual interface. Okay, so our connection is completed successfully. If we drop down here to these connector attributes, we've got the information that I talked about before. We also have this connection ID. So I'm going to just commit to memory 22T5 because that's the last four alphanumeric digits or characters, if you will, of my connector. So let's go back over to our Direct Connect Gateway in our AWS console. And let's create our virtual interface. Sorry, one more thing. I just want to go here to connections. Okay, sorry. Before we do that real quick, I needed to go and accept this connection. So I just realized I jumped ahead, but this connection that we created from within Control Center, I need to go accept that connection before I can actually create anything on top of it. So you'll see that it's in an ordering status right now. I need to select that connection, which is that 22T5 that I talked about committing to memory. I'm going to go ahead and click on that connection, and then I'm going to click on accept. And then I'm going to accept that connection. Now, the next steps that we're going to do is we're going to create our transit virtual interface. But before we do that, we need this state to show available. If it's not available, we'll fill all this information in and it'll tell us it's not available. So we'll need to wait and make sure that this becomes available, and then we can take the next step and create our transit virtual interface. All right. Looks like our connection is available. So the next steps that we are going to do, if we go back to our diagram, is we're going to create our virtual interface, our transit virtual interface directly into AWS. So to do that, we've got our direct connect that we're sitting on right now, this connection. We're going to create a virtual interface. We are going to make it a transit virtual interface. And we are going to put in a name. It's filled in our connection for us, so we don't need to do that. And it is asking who the virtual interface owner is. I'm going to leave it under my AWS account. However, if that environment that you were going into, if we go back to our drawing, let's say this environment belonged to someone else, you would use their account ID. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as my account ID, and I'm going to select my Direct Connect gateway that I built. I'm going to leave the VLAN alone. This is a layer 3 connectivity, so we don't need to modify that VLAN. And then under the BGP ASN, I'll go back again to the drawing, and keep in mind the ASN or autonomous system number we're talking about for Lumen is 3549. For AWS, it is 64512. If you didn't know that, you'd be able to go back to Control Center, and you would be able to scroll down to connector attributes, and you'd be able to see those ASNs or autonomous system numbers. So we're going to go ahead and fill in 3549 because that is really what's representing our on-premise router. And then we're going to click on additional settings because not only do we need to do that, we need to give these peer IPs for the VIF itself, or the virtual interface. So we're going to go out of the AWS console, go into Control Center. We're going to say, keep in mind, when you're thinking about it, Lumen is your router. The AWS router is here on the right. So for your router, this is the peering IP that you are picking. And then for the AWS side, the cloud provider router IP is what you should select. Okay, and then lastly, we need to go out of the AWS console where we're building our transit virtual interface, go back to Control Center. We need to get this BGP authentication key. Without that, our BGP session for the virtual interface will not come up. I'm going to paste that in, and I have all the information I need. I have the ASN or autonomous system number that is being used by Lumen to peer directly from this IP address to this IP address on AWS using this BGP authentication key. So I'm going to go over here to my far right bottom side where it says Create Virtual Interface, and I'm going to click it, and it's going to go out and create our virtual interface. Meanwhile, we wait. Right now it says pending. It's going to take a few minutes, but we're going to wait till this comes all the way up, and then we'll go in and see that our BGP peering is established, and then we've completed this task. So for now, let's wait. Okay. It looks like our virtual interface has become available. I'm going to go ahead and click on the ID. And in here, you'll see that the BGP status is up. So I now have full connectivity between my AWS environment and my MPLS backbone.